Now, according to this new bill, 5599, which was recently passed in Washington state, if your child wants gender-affirming care, the state now has a, quote, compelling reason to foster them as a runaway without immediately notifying you of your child's whereabouts. That's so crazy to me, honestly. Even worse, while in the state's care, your child can undergo irreversible surgical interventions like a mastectomy and facial feminization without parental consent. The suddenly helpless parents, they have no legal recourse under this new bill to reunite with their runaway child because the state will not inform them of their whereabouts, for protection. Only the child can trigger the reunification under this law. Get your kids the hell out of Washington state. As a parent, I'm furious, but I'm definitely not alone. Joining me now to discuss, senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation and former senior counsel at the U.S. Department of Education under Trump, Sarah Parshall-Perry, and Washington state representative and mom of 6, bless you, Stephanie Barnard. Barnard, welcome to you both. I appreciate you being here. Mom of 6, wow, that took me off guard. So, all right, so Sarah, I want to ask you here. This comes out with the Washington law where they can just, if your kid, 7, 10, 12 years old kid wants to run away, the state of Washington says we will foster that kid and provide gender-affirming care that may or may not be irreversible.
Yeah, my singular criteria for this bill is whether or not it passes legal muster. And I'm going to tell you right now, it does not. In fact, it's patently unconstitutional. But as a mom, not just as a constitutional scholar, I have to tell you that I am particularly concerned about the fact that this is a bill that has ultimately divested parents who have a right to dissent from their own children's decisions of life-altering consequences. It's divested them of their custodial interest. My singular comfort in all this is that it's unlikely to pass legal muster.
We can only pray. Stephanie, you were on the House floor, I'm assuming, during a lot of these deliberations. What in the world was the supporting argument for this?
The individual rights of children and the suicide rate for transgender individuals. That was the argument. It was unbelievable, as all of us that are parents know, when a child goes missing or when you're in Walmart or shopping or for any reason whatsoever, or maybe someone comes home a half an hour after curfew. It is a mother that goes out and gets in her car and calls friends and calls the family. And if you can't get a hold of them within a couple of hours, you're calling the police and filing a missing children's report and all of these things. I think if the parents don't know where their child is, there's concern. But putting all of the power in giving it to the state, handing it over to the state to make these critical decisions and allow your child, who's just a child, to make life-altering decisions, it's incomprehensible.
Right. I mean, Sarah, could you imagine did anybody on that floor, you think, raise their hand and say, hey guys, these are not our kids. These are the parents' kids.
It's interesting because this was a vote specifically along party lines. All the Democrats voted yes. All the Republicans voted no. And I think this is what I find surprising is that we know that this issue of trans suicide is ultimately a red herring, that the data does not support it, that in fact, this is something that the left has used forever to push forward this transgender sort of gender ideology nonsense. Would you rather have a dead son or a live daughter? We know this not to be true. The studies actually support it. But I'm going to tell you the fact that this particular congressman, who is known as a hard left progressive operative, has no children of his own, indicates to me exactly how far he is on this issue. He is depriving parents of their fundamental interest. In fact, one that the Supreme Court recognized as the longest they've ever recognized. He's depriving them strictly with the stroke of a pen. We can only pray that this falls ultimately under a legal challenge.
But Stephanie, there's a lot of things come out of these far left states, and then more purplish, maybe slightly blue states go oh, they passed it in Washington. Let's try that here because government power. How many parents voted in favor of this compared to parents who did? I mean, obviously it was party lines.
Well, there was a survey done, and it showed that 80% of Washingtonians disagree with this issue. So on this issue,
80.
Parental rights is important to most Washingtonians. And if my child came to me and said, "Hey, Mom, I think I'm transgender," and I disagreed, even if I said, "Don't do this, you're grounded," that would be enough to have them keep my child from me, not tell me where they are, and go forward with giving them puberty blockers or even surgery. And that most Washingtonians are against this.
Yeah, well, I tell you, Washington State better be real glad I don't live there with my kids, because they'd have a big problem. But Sarah, I want to talk about this UN thing, 'cause this is like super bizarre. They're like, hey, you know what? Younger children below 18, they should definitely be able to make, sexual consent decisions. And now you can't own a firearm because they're not mature enough, but you can make sexual consent decisions as young as 14, 13, 12, they're saying. I mean, what? What?
Well, I'll tell you what happens is this is a law ultimately of diminishing returns and the ultimate slippery slope. We saw this in the Supreme Court with Obergefell versus Hodges. Conservatives were considered alarmist because they said, essentially plucking a right to a constitutional same-sex marriage out of thin air could be problematic for other rights. We've seen now Bostock versus Clayton County in 2020, which allowed gender identity to be sort of swept under the rug within the context of sex. This is where we're going next. When we define biology in such a way that it can be shucked off like so much of yesterday's clothes, it presents to us a problem that only gets worse. The solution is to toe the line on biological reality, not to change what we know to be true for thousands of years, which is supported by DNA evidence, because here is where we find ourselves. Never would the UN obviously be considered sort of a bastion of conservatism, or even, for heaven's sake, moderate sort of behavior or inclinations. But what we've seen here in the United States, coming out of California, coming out of Washington State, is an indicia of things to come, and that is incredibly worrisome.
Got to leave it there. Sarah Parshall-Perry, Stephanie Barnard. I am sorry you had to go through this, Stephanie, too, as well. It is unbelievable to me. Thank you.